Hi, Joe Kehrig with the Kehrig Real Estate Team, and this is your San Ramon Valley update. Well, I've talked about it. There's been so much talk about, the conflict overseas and, interest rates going up, gas going up. What is it all about and what is really the reasoning behind it? Well, when you look at the first slide by Mortgage News Daily, they say even if the war were to end today, there's been sufficient disruption to infrastructure and a big enough initial spike in energy prices create what economists refer to as a second round effects. In simpler terms, this means that inflation expectations and interest rates will not immediately return to February's level simply because the war is over. And the reason why is because when interest rates, keeps interest rates up is a fear of inflation. And we've all seen what gas prices is. I look out my office and literally it's gone from like $3.89 to $5.89 just for regular gas. And you know what? The war, well, I'm not going to sit there and say the war is over, but the escalation of it has calmed down. And you know what? I look across, it's still $2 higher than it was just a few months ago. So obviously the Federal Reserve, that's the one fear that they always have is inflation. And obviously you raise the interest rate to tamp down inflation, and that's what they're doing. But one thing that's happening besides that, the seller activity is picking up just in time for spring. Because as we've talked about before, and when you look at this graph, fresh listings are adding to the market supply. You see all the way back to 2023, the green bars are where they were in March. And you can see that, 3 years ago, 342,000, 395, 435, and now 439 throughout the country. So inventory is definitely raising, and you'll see it when we go through each of our cities, San Ramon and Danville and such forth, when we get into the graphs. But here's the surprising things, because homes aren't selling as much now. So the home delisting soared in 2025. You can see, look at these bar graphs going all the way back to 2021. Obviously, there weren't a lot of homes that came off the market 2021-22. But look at in October and the end of the year in 2025, that there was a record amount, almost 120,000 listings nationwide that basically, people just took them off the market because they weren't selling. Matter of fact, as you see here, nearly 45,000 U.S. homes that were delisted last year were relisted for sale in January 2026. So what happened is people pull them off because they're not selling, and then they put them back on, early spring when the market picks up. The highest January figure in records dating back to 2016. That represents a record 3.6 of the homes that were on the market in January, and you can see it through this graph going back all the way to 2016. Again, you see 2021, 22, there's hardly, very few listings that were relistings that were put back on the market because everything sold. But you can see in 2026, like I said, it's higher than it's ever been since 2016 over the last 10 years. And you also see here buyer activity is increasing. So the monthly buyer pending listing count, again, going back 3 years, 396, then in March last year, 416, and up to 432. So even though what's happening is listings are going up, but also our sales. And people go, well, boy, look at all the homes that are being delisted that aren't selling. But still, there's more sales. In the peak of 2021, there were almost 7 million, over 6 million homes sold throughout the United States. The last 2 years, there's been like 4 million, a third less. But they're expecting now that inventory is rising because the more homes on the market, the more will sell, even though there's still a lot of homes that aren't selling. So they expect maybe to go up about 10% to about 4.5 million. Home prices aren't crashing, but growth is flattening, and that's what's happening with the market. Look what happens when pricing right matters more than the last few years, because obviously, again, you see 2020, 21, 22, that there was almost 50% of the homes that sold above asking price, and very few that sold below asking price. Now you can see that's basically turned upside down, where you have the sold above listing price 23%, the sold below listing price 62%. That's all about supply and demand. The demand is still there, but if you have more supply, then that's what's going to have people be a little bit more competitive as far as being able to knock the price down a little bit. There are still areas, like I've talked about before, West Side Alamo, West Side Danville, Round Hill, different areas where you're still getting multiple offers. But for the most part, homes aren't selling in a week anymore. But the homes that are selling is, 3 weeks. That's why when some of my agents come to me and say, hey, we haven't sold for a couple weeks, I say, give it a couple weeks, because the average time on the market now is, more like 3 weeks instead of 1 week when the market was really hot. Inventory growth is driven more by homes staying on the market rather than the fresh supply. In other words, you're seeing inventory climb. Yes, there's more homes being relisted, more new homes coming on the market, but the main thing is because there's a lot of homes that are staying on the market and aren't selling. You see, in 2021 and early 2022, new listings accounted for roughly 85 to 90% of active listings. So everything was selling, and the only thing that was coming on and why we had such a lack of inventory were new listings. Now that ratio has gone from 85 to 90% to just 36% of basically, new listings. What's making up the other 64%? Well, homes being relisted that were deleted, and then also homes that have already been on the market that just haven't sold. Now, what's our market doing? Well, you can see it's kind of all over the board again. You can see that definitely inventory's up. We're back up to about 137 homes in San Ramon, 51 homes pending. And like I always say, if you're below 33%, it's an active market. If you basically are 50% above pendings compared to actives, you're really at a seller's market. But you can see in the pendings on this one, we're below 33%. So it's an active market. It's a nuts market, or we're actually a little bit above 33%. So with 137 active and 51 pending. Danville market, well, that's a little bit of a topsy-turvy, because now we have 139 homes on the market and only 43. So that's obviously below 33%. So that market's slowing down, and you can see the last few weeks in Danville, inventory's gone up and up, and pendings are down and down. Now, we have been in an extended spring break. So extended, it seems like there's spring break's been going on for a month, but officially it just ended not too long ago. So anyway, inventory's up in Danville. Alamo, inventory is staying about the same, but pending sales have gone down. But you still have more than half as many pendings as you do actives, because Alamo, a lot of Alamo makes up that West Side, Round Hill, very hot market. So you got 50% pendings compared to active. Dublin market, well, it's staying about the same, as you can see, actives and pendings. But again, it's less than 33%. So we would consider that an active market. So, again, the home prices aren't crashing, but they're definitely flattening out a little bit. And you can see that things are still selling for 100% or more of asking. Sometimes you see, like the last couple weeks in Alamo, where you see 116% and 104%. That's because there's only a couple homes a week that close in Alamo. And you have situations that sometimes are just underpriced. We had an agent from outside the area come in and price a home at $1.6 million, and I'm sitting there going, wow, that home's going to sell for over $2 million. It sold for between $2.2 and $2.3, and it kind of kilters off when you only have a few closings. But for the most part, things are still selling around 100% of asking. Average time on the market about 3 weeks. If you haven't sold in about a month, then the market's telling you what's going on. And obviously, always feel free to reach out if you have any questions with us. Are you thinking about putting it on the market, or it's been on the market, or you're having a hard time selling it? Again, we're always there as consultants to help you out. Just give me a call. My personal cell number is 925-487-6838, or drop me an email, joe@kehrigteam.com, or visit our website to learn more about the Kehrig team, www.kehrigteam.com. Expect some changes, more inventory coming on the market. The key is, we know more inventory is going to come on the market after spring break. The key is the absorption rate going to keep going with the more homes on the market. So far it has. More homes have been going up, but as far as the percentage of pendings and new homes, they've been staying pretty steady. But let's see what happens as we go into the summer, the summer months, to see if that stills. But if you want to know, just stay tuned. Again, Joe Kehrig, Kehrig Real Estate Team.